This is the moment when a Department of Justice attorney stood before a federal judge and said words that no lawyer in American history has ever uttered in a courtroom. Your Honor, I am asking you to hold me in contempt. I am asking you to arrest me. Because this system has become so broken, so completely dysfunctional, that spending 24 hours in a jail cell sounds like relief compared to what I am being forced to do right now. If you had walked into courtroom 5B at the federal courthouse in Minneapolis this week, you would have seen something extraordinary. You would have seen a Department of Justice lawyer, Julie Lee, standing at the podium with tears running down her face. You would have seen stacks of unprocessed legal files covering every available surface. You would have seen a judge staring in disbelief at the chaos unfolding before him. As of 2:47 p.m. on Thursday, February 1st, 2026, Julie Lee became the public face of a Department of Justice in complete meltdown. Already drowning in 96 violated court orders, already stripped of nearly all senior leadership, already facing contempt proceedings from the chief federal judge in Minnesota, the DOJ has just been humiliated by one of its own attorneys begging to be thrown in jail just to escape the nightmare. In this story, we are going to reveal exactly what happened in that courtroom. We are going to expose the chain of Trump administration orders that created this crisis. We are going to show you the private conversations where ICE officials laughed about ignoring federal judges. And we are going to explain why this single moment represents the collapse of the rule of law in America. Before we go any further, if you want to stay updated on this developing crisis, hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. We are tracking every court filing, every violation, every moment of this constitutional breakdown as it happens. The Department of Justice is not just struggling, they are drowning in their own incompetence and cruelty. 3 weeks ago, Donald Trump signed an executive order that seemed simple on paper. It directed Immigration and Customs Enforcement to accelerate deportations of undocumented immigrants, with an emphasis on what the order called criminal aliens. The plan was to show strength, to demonstrate that Trump was keeping his campaign promises about border security. It was supposed to be surgical, targeted, professional. But the cost was not just constitutional rights. It was the complete erosion of federal courts' authority over law enforcement agencies. This meant that ICE agents could arrest anyone they wanted, hold them as long as they wanted, and ignore any federal judge who said otherwise. Civil rights lawyers across Minnesota immediately filed dozens of habeas corpus petitions. These are emergency legal filings that force the government to justify why someone is being held in detention. They argued that ICE was holding American citizens, legal permanent residents, and asylum seekers without any due process. They argued that people were being detained based solely on their appearance or their last names. They argued that the Trump administration was violating the Constitution. But Chief Judge Patrick Schultz and his colleagues issued order after order, directing ICE to release specific individuals, to provide evidence for detentions, to follow basic legal procedures. Those orders were supposed to have the force of law behind them. Federal agencies are required to comply with federal court orders. That is how the system works. That is how America works. Trump and his ICE director Todd Lyons gambled that federal judges would back down. They assumed that if they ignored enough orders, if they stalled long enough, if they overwhelmed the court system with sheer volume, the judges would give up. They assumed that outrage would fade and the news cycle would move on. They assumed wrong. At exactly 2:30 p.m. last Thursday, Julie Lee walked into Judge Blackwell's courtroom to argue 5 habeas corpus cases. These were 5 human beings who had been held in ICE detention for weeks, some of them American citizens, all of them entitled to have a judge review why they were being imprisoned. For the first 10 minutes, it was a standard legal proceeding. Judge Blackwell asked questions. Julie Lee provided the government's position. Papers were shuffled. Court reporters typed. Then, Judge Blackwell asked the question that changed everything. Ms. Lee, I have ordered ICE to release 3 of these individuals 2 weeks ago. I have ordered ICE to provide evidence justifying detention in the other 2 cases 10 days ago. Why have none of my orders been followed? Julie Lee's voice started shaking. She looked down at her notes. She looked back up at the judge. And then she said something that made the entire courtroom go silent. Your Honor, I have no guidance. I have no direction. I have been working 18-hour days trying to get ICE to comply with court orders, and they are ignoring me, just like they are ignoring you. But this was just the beginning of her breakdown. While Julie Lee was standing at that podium fighting to maintain her composure, 3 more emergency habeas petitions were being filed in other courtrooms in that same building. While she was explaining that her office had been reduced from 32 attorneys to just 6, ICE agents were conducting raids in South Minneapolis that would lead to 17 more unlawful detention cases. At that exact same moment, the acting U.S. Attorney for Minnesota, who had only been in the job for 9 days because everyone else had quit, was on a conference call with Washington, D.C., being screamed at for not controlling the judges. And most shockingly, leaked audio from an ICE planning meeting that morning revealed officers joking about federal court orders being suggestions and placing bets on how many contempt citations they could rack up before anyone actually faced consequences. Judge Blackwell interrupted her. Ms. Lee, are you telling this court that the Department of Justice cannot compel a federal law enforcement agency to follow federal court orders? That is when Julie Lee broke down completely. Your Honor, this job sucks. The system sucks. I am trying with every breath I have to do what you are ordering me to do, and I cannot do it. Our office has been gutted. The people who used to provide guidance have all resigned. ICE is operating like they answer to no one. And honestly, at this point, I would rather you hold me in contempt and let me spend 24 hours in a jail cell where I can actually get some sleep than continue trying to make sense of this nightmare. The courtroom went completely silent. Judge Blackwell leaned forward. His voice was cold and precise. Ms. Lee, this crisis is entirely of the Department of Justice's own making. Your agency chose to ignore court orders. Your leadership chose to resign rather than do their jobs. And now you are standing in my courtroom telling me that the United States government has decided that federal judges are optional. According to documents leaked to the Minneapolis Star-Tribune, there was an emergency video conference at 6 a.m. that same morning. The participants included Todd Lyons, the head of ICE, 3 regional directors, the acting U.S. Attorney for Minnesota, and 2 attorneys from the Office of Legal Counsel at Main Justice in Washington. The topic was blunt. What do we do about the Minnesota judges? One regional ICE director asked the obvious question. Are we actually going to comply with these court orders, or are we going to keep doing what we have been doing? There was a long pause on the call. Then Todd Lyons spoke. Our orders come from the President. The President has made it clear that we are to prioritize removals over paperwork. If judges want to second-guess the President's authority over immigration enforcement, they can take it up with the Supreme Court. In the meantime, we have a job to do. The acting U.S. Attorney tried to object. Mr. Lyons, with all respect, we are talking about federal court orders. We are talking about contempt proceedings. We are talking about Chief Judge Schultz threatening to personally haul you into court. Lyons cut him off. Then let him try. It was a cold, calculated political decision. They looked at the chaos in the courts, which was generating negative headlines. They looked at the attorneys resigning, which was creating staffing nightmares. They looked at civil rights groups filing lawsuits, which was costing money and time. They realized that none of it mattered, as much as showing Trump they were loyal. The decision was made. Keep ignoring the judges. Let the DOJ attorneys twist in the wind. Dare the courts to actually enforce their orders. Todd Lyons is a creation of the Trump administration. He was appointed specifically because he promised aggressive immigration enforcement without apologies. But Trump did not appoint him to create a constitutional crisis. Trump appointed him to generate deportation statistics that could be celebrated at rallies. Now, Lyons is caught between two incompatible demands: comply with court orders and slow down deportations, which makes Trump angry, or ignore court orders and face contempt proceedings, which makes the courts angry. He has chosen Trump because Trump can fire him, and judges cannot. This shifts power from the judicial branch to the executive branch in a way that is fundamentally un-American. Judge Blackwell can issue all the orders he wants, but if ICE simply refuses to comply, what can he actually do? He can hold people in contempt. He can issue fines. He can theoretically order arrests of ICE officials. But all of that requires the executive branch to enforce judicial orders. And the executive branch is the one violating those orders in the first place. What legal scholars will call the Minnesota standoff is actually a constitutional crisis in slow motion. This is not a disagreement about policy. This is a fundamental question about whether federal courts have any power to check federal law enforcement when that law enforcement is acting on direct orders from the president. The legal ramifications are staggering. Chief Judge Schultz has announced he is preparing contempt proceedings against ICE as an agency and potentially against individual ICE officials, including Todd Lyons. The claims include willful violation of court orders, obstruction of justice, and constitutional violations of due process. This is not the ACLU filing a lawsuit. This is a federal judge preparing to use the contempt power to punish a federal agency. If Schultz actually hauls Todd Lyons into court and jails him for contempt, that could trigger a showdown between the courts and the White House that has not been seen since the Nixon era. Here is the domino effect. If ICE continues ignoring court orders, then judges will escalate to contempt proceedings. If judges escalate to contempt, then the White House will frame it as activist judges undermining immigration enforcement. If the White House attacks the judges publicly, then it gives permission to other federal agencies to ignore court orders they don't like. If that happens, then the entire concept of judicial review collapses. We are looking at the Watergate crisis meeting the immigration debate. China is watching this. Russia is watching this. Every authoritarian government in the world is watching America's federal courts lose a power struggle with America's executive branch. They see that the rule of law in America is negotiable. They see that a determined president can simply ignore judges. A desperate ICE director can be a useful propaganda tool for regimes that want to claim American democracy is a sham. Where is the Republican leadership in Congress? Silence. Where is the Senate Judiciary Committee? Silent. Where are the prominent Republican lawyers who usually defend institutional norms? Silent. Why? Because criticizing Trump's immigration enforcement is political suicide in today's Republican Party. They are calculating that defending judges against ICE is a losing position with their base. They are positioning themselves to survive the next primary, not to defend the Constitution. This creates a split in the legal community that cannot be healed. On one side, you have federal judges, civil rights lawyers, and constitutional scholars who believe courts must have the power to check executive overreach. On the other side, you have immigration hardliners, Trump loyalists, and law and order conservatives who believe judges are interfering with necessary enforcement. A divided legal system cannot provide equal justice under law. Reports from attorneys still working in the Minnesota U.S. Attorney's Office describe an environment of complete dysfunction. Files are piled on desks because there is nobody to process them. Phones ring unanswered because the staff has been cut by 80%. Attorneys like Julie Lee are working until they collapse, because there is simply nobody else left. The image of Julie Lee crying in court is not just a sad moment for one overworked lawyer. It is a symbol of what happens when political loyalty replaces constitutional duty. It represents the human cost of treating immigration enforcement as a loyalty test instead of a legal process. Julie Lee wanted to serve her country. She ended up as collateral damage in a constitutional crisis. You can spin polling numbers. You can spin media coverage. You can spin political narratives. But you cannot spin a lawyer begging a judge to jail her because the system has become unbearable. You cannot spin 96 violated court orders. You cannot spin an entire U.S. Attorney's Office resigning in protest. Reality wins. So where are we? Julie Lee is still technically employed by the Department of Justice, but legal observers expect her to be reassigned or forced out within days for her public breakdown. The Minnesota federal courts have turned on ICE. The legal community has turned on the Trump administration's immigration tactics. Civil rights organizations have filed a dozen new lawsuits. Todd Lyons is isolated. He has the most powerful immigration enforcement position in America, and yet he is one contempt order away from becoming the first sitting ICE director to be jailed by a federal judge. As we head into the next few weeks, expect this situation to get worse before it gets better. The Trump administration will try to paint judges as soft on immigration. They might try to remove judges from immigration-related cases through political pressure. They could even try to use congressional Republicans to threaten court funding. But what cannot be undone is this simple fact. The federal courts have been shown to be powerless when the executive branch simply refuses to comply. The foundation of judicial independence is cracked. Trust between federal agencies and federal courts cannot be rebuilt with a press release. When the chief federal judge in a state publicly accuses a federal agency of violating more court orders in 1 month than some agencies violate in their entire existence, there is no walking that back. Make sure you subscribe to this channel right now. We will be monitoring every single development in this crisis over the next 72 hours. If Chief Judge Schultz issues contempt orders against Todd Lyons, we will break it down immediately. If more DOJ attorneys resign in protest, you will hear about it here first. This is not just a news story. This is a constitutional crisis unfolding in real time. Stay informed, stay engaged, and remember that the rule of law only works when everyone, including the president and his appointees, agrees to follow it.